Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Dumbarton Oaks Research Library and Collection, John Beardsley and Jeanne Haffner.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Beardsley, Director of Garden and Landscape Studies at Dumbarton Oaks, which is Harvard's research outpost in the humanities here in Washington, D.C. I'm here with my colleague, Jeanne Haffner, who's a postdoctoral fellow at Dumbarton Oaks, and together we've organized this session to bring you some inspiring stories of success in the city. With the support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, we've started an initiative at Dumbarton Oaks in urban landscape studies, which is dedicated to bringing scholars and designers together to address how urban landscapes came to be the way they are and how best to manage them for the present and for the future. We're delighted to further both the ambitions of our program and those of this summit by being a presentation partner here at the Earth Optimism Summit. We live in an urban age. Over half the world's population now lives in cities, with a percentage only expected to grow in the coming decades. This means that if we're to be successful in conservation, we need to work hard in urban areas. We need to manage our cities better for biodiversity and environmental health, and we need to capture the hearts and minds of urban dwellers for the causes of conservation by combining efforts in resiliency and adaptability with commitments to environmental justice. And this is because the cities are the conservation's largest constituency. Few might have predicted over the past century that cities would become so central to conservation concerns. Cities have long been considered adversaries of environmental health. The social reformer Ebenezer Howard, for example, personified cities as smoke fiends to promote his Garden Cities movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In a landmark 1968 book titled Design with Nature, the landscape architect and planner Ian McHarg bolstered his argument for ecological design with images of dark cities plagued by pollution, refuse, disease, and social maladies of all kinds. Howard, McHarg, and others might never have even imagined that 21st century cities could become important sites for environmental remediation, energy efficiency, stewardship, and pedagogy. But this is surprisingly the direction we are moving toward today. It is the efforts of people working in diverse fields, from education and advocacy to design and planning, through initiatives in both public and private sectors, that have brought about this remarkable transformation in cities. This panel assembles a few of those innovative individuals to present their own stories of environmental success in cities.
And I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. The way we imagine this panel is a series of case studies followed by an overview. So we're going to start with a case study on Newark, New Jersey, then move to Nairobi, and then come back to New York City, and finally have Tim Beatley provide a bird's eye view of the role of cities in sustainability. So we're going to zoom in and then zoom out. And I'm pleased to present our first speaker, Damon Rich, who is a partner at Hector, Urban Design, Planning, and Civic Arts. Between 2008 and 2015, he was director of the Newark Planning Office. He oversaw the successful transformation of Newark's waterfront along the Passaic River, which was the city's first riverfront park. Damon is also the founder and former executive director of the Center for Urban Pedagogy, a nonprofit that aims to kind of translate terminology from planning into lay terms so that people can participate in the planning process.
So please welcome Damon Rich.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm the kind of person that would like to think that images like this one, dramatic befores and afters, are optimistic. But I gotta say, whether it's because I hang around a lot with teenagers or because I'm from Missouri, the show me state, I'm a little more skeptical than that. And so today, I'd like to talk about before, after, and beyond. Now, sometimes you love something a lot, like conservation or design, and you want to think about it like a goodie that's being offered up to the public. But I've learned through hard experience that a better way to start the conversation is to pretend that you're a stranger at the party, desperately trying to talk to anyone. So I'm going to tell you a story like that about Newark, New Jersey. Its riverfront is the reason that there's a city there, like a lot of urban cities. Also, like a lot of riverfronts, it's been the inheritor of a lot of toxic environmental nastiness. This is a list, even partial, of the companies that the EPA has found responsible for the pollution of the river. And if you go there, you'll see a lot of what planners call underutilized property. You might not even think that there's an environment there if you see this view from the beginning of The Sopranos. And all of this is not for lack of planning. You can go back to the early 60s, and when I started the job as the planning director, the mayor gave me this stack, 4 feet tall of plans, many with quite exclusionary ideas about the city, maybe made by the same people that put up this kind of sign that says, "Downtown Newark, yours to rediscover," only a block away from one of the most continuously populated places in the whole state of New Jersey. And this has an impact on environmental infrastructure. So the Army Corps was looking to deal with floods up in the suburbs, and they wanted to build this giant pipe underneath the city. And the way that would look at the city side was this bulkhead, this underground infrastructure, and they sold it by saying that they'd come back to build this public space with these maybe not so inspiring drawings. But if you go there today, this is what you see. Something that doesn't really respond to anyone's desire. So the goal number 1 of our work was first to make the environment public. Of all those plans, there was one by the Ironbound Community Corporation that took a really different approach. And so inspired by that, rather than one big plan, we made a bunch of plans to see which would get political support. And we set a goal of involving 2% of Newarkers in the remaking of this place. I was ignorant, so I started hanging out with teenagers, making maps, doing interviews. We found amazing stories like public housing tenants that had fought for riverfront access. We saw a really long-standing movement towards environmental justice and organizing around getting riverfront parks. And so as a group, we began to think about what this would look like. And eventually, we made a proposal for what the riverfront would look like in the year 3000. And the mayor came and cut a ribbon. We installed it next to where you pay your water bill, so all those people paying their water bill would maybe think a little bit about it. The young people were taken by the news and put on TV where they said, "These troublesome kids have an idea, and now the city wants to explore this riverfront." We had to deal with the segregation of our city, which is something that also is not unique to Newark. So we tried to find any way to make it seem like an attractive and fun thing to come to this place that was off the map. We offered $5 waterfront tours for 2 hours, and we've had 10,000 people come so far. There, you look and listen, but you also talk with your neighbors about what this place could mean. We also have $100 tours for the high rollers in town, because it's important to reach them, too. On walk shops, we try to peel back the layers that say how this place got this way. And this is how we did for 4 years. But the numbers weren't the important thing. It was about building the relationships, which leads to the second piece of nourishing the regulatory imagination. We knew that the city made a lot of rules about how the environment developed along the riverfront, but hadn't really used a lot of them. So we tried to organize a conversation around 24 basic questions, looking at the neighborhoods upland from the river and how they could have a more productive relationship with the land right along it. We designed a set of Newark zoning workbooks that would take people through this sometimes complex and abstract social technology. And these were designed for use in the basic unit of civil society, the block club, the neighborhood association. It took you through different scenarios, and you could talk about the pros and the cons. Eventually, this led to a citywide resident statement about the future of the riverfront, for the first time, a broad coalition. And the city council passed new zoning that most of all required public access to the riverfront, although some property owners have put that in court. And that leads to the third and final goal, which is building with roots in organized communities. This is not built with roots in organized communities, and that's a problem. So after our boat tours and other kinds of events, we sometimes would have 100 people want to come out and talk about what the first riverfront park would look like. And one of our first moves was to take those old plans, which had focused on the downtown as a place of real estate value, and say, no, our first phase should be in this neighborhood where there's already such a strong environmental justice movement. And building from there, we can spread that energy to areas that today are very far away from any kind of human inhabitation. So we went from places that were looking like this. The high school students came back and made a coming soon sign, trying to communicate what they thought was going to be most important to the spirit of this place. And so far, we've built out about 20 acres, which is about a $35 million public investment. Here you see, looking over the first two segments, that's City Hall with the gold dome. And you might say, why is this Boardwalk Orange? Well, it's not just because the mayor wears orange ties or Agent Orange or the color of Wequahic High School. It's a multi-layered symbolic system that is accreted onto this. And now it's used in all other kinds of ways with other messages. And so this space, as we designed it, we wanted it to reflect the spirit of the movements that brought it to life. People said, we fought for 20 years for a little bit of riverfront access. We don't want just a nice park and for people to forget the story. And it's important that it's an anti-racist space. So much of the development has been driven by an agenda of white supremacy in a generalized structural sense that we try to push back against. So some of those narratives we really wanted to bring to the surface. So as you enter the park, you start to see clues about some of the spirits that lie there. You look down and you see inscriptions like the amazing poem that you probably know by Langston Hughes about rivers in an Afrocentric worldview. You can also see the listing of all of the public and private sources of funds that went into the park. As you go down to the river's edge, you start to see this railing that every once in a while is inscribed with a story. Like, for example, what is that big pipe sticking out into the river? Oh, well, to understand that, you have to understand combined sewer overflow. And understand that, you have to understand a little bit about the history of sewers in Newark, like most places. First, there wasn't a sewer. Then they built a pipe that basically went to the river, which worked for a while, but got pretty stinky fast. Then they built a water treatment plant, and that worked pretty well, except when it rained, and then it overflowed with untreated sewage back into the river. And that's why today, I bet some of you are involved in issues to take things off of stormwater treatment, to have rain barrels, et cetera. Other stories include some of the industrial archaeology and the spirits that came from that, or the fish and wildlife, like this crab that says, "Do not eat me, I am poisonous." So these become places where these stories are transmitted and reactivated, sometimes contested. Someone took this into their own hands to complain about a gas-powered fuel plant. There's also these narrative logs that come out of the same set of narratives. So we had to pay about $3 million to take metal out of the ground from a former smelting use. And we were able, therefore, to learn about the social history of this use, from the technology to the fights about labor unions. We commemorated actual living memories. So we had living people being like, "You got my hairstyle wrong. Fix it, please." But this is what allows us to connect to this rich soil of civic life in the city. We have public art projects that celebrate the complexity of Newarkness, that try to locate this place in relation to an overall citywide imaginary. But all of that physical stuff is only the second in importance. Much more important is the programming. Every time we open a new piece of park, we have a walk to the water, led by the Malcolm X Shabazz Marching Band, the baddest marching band in Newark. People who do cool things all over the city come at least to this one place once a year to share the cool things that they do, whether it be traditional dances or certain kinds of music or interesting graphic design that now comes to cohabitate with the world of the Orange Boardwalk. We built the first publicly accessible boat dock in about 100 years, and in fact, Latino and Black people love boating. We have every kind of program that we can muster, whether it's gospel or my favorite, house music on Friday nights with DJ Omar Abdallah, and then maybe on Sunday morning you go and have a first baptism. So this becomes a place in the life of the city. And as we go forward, the initiative gets the support of much larger and more influential organizations. And recently they've put out, and I'm happy to share it with you, this piece of literature that explains things like what is a Superfund site or how do actually new parks get built. It takes the traditional view of the city going towards New York City and tries to flip it around to really show the riverfront in detail so you can see, again, the components of this life force. But there's challenges, whether it's Hurricane Sandy or more bad ideas from the Army Corps, real estate developers looking to capitalize on this public investment and gentrify the city, and maybe even push out those people that fought against those shipping containers to get riverfront access. So if we're going to have a party to change the world, it's going to have to be a pretty good one with pretty different types of people there. Maybe it's going to look something like this. So to bring this to a conclusion, first party's coming up in 2 weeks. I hope that today I've convinced you that if you're going to have that party, you shouldn't have separate parties for conservation, for organizing, and for design, that all of these are going to be really important guests at that soiree that you put together to change the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Damon, and I'm coming to the party. Our next speaker is David Auerbach, who is a co-founder of Sanergy, Sustainable Solutions for Growing Cities. This is a startup that actually originated as an MIT course project and now provides sanitation services in impoverished areas in Nairobi, Kenya. And before starting up Sanergy, David served as Deputy Chair of Poverty Alleviation at the Clinton Global Initiative. Please welcome David.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am here to talk about a very crappy problem at this optimistic summit. So I live and work in Nairobi, Kenya. And Nairobi, like many cities in the world, is going through very, very rapid urbanization. Just from a global perspective, right now, 1 billion people live in urban slums today. And in the next 13 years, there'll be 2 billion people in the same space. This has a profound effect on the growth of cities, and it can be everything from where will people live, where will you get your food from, where people can go to school. And the thing that we think about at Sanergy is the sanitation crisis. Now, globally, there's about 4.1 billion people who live in communities where the waste is never treated. This has a profound health impact of 1 million people dying every single year from sanitation-related disease, and a profound economic consequence, too. The World Bank estimates it costs about $260 billion in lost GDP because of sanitation-related disease. Where I work in Kenya, facts are not much better. 8 million people live in slums, 17,000 children die every year due to sanitation-related disease, and $270 million is lost in GDP each year. Now, it's important that you understand what the challenge is and what it's like in the communities where we work. It starts, as you can see on the left here, with the sanitation facilities. This is a pit latrine. It's really the pits. Basically, it provides a little bit of privacy, but otherwise, the waste is dropping into underneath, where it leaches into the soil and the waterways, causing tremendous environmental damage. People are paying to use these facilities every day, and this one here is actually is a clean one. Second, what you see is that the waste then has to be removed. And these guys, they're called frogmen. And they're called frogmen literally because they will jump into these pits to manually empty them. And what the guys are pushing there, they call an ambulance. And the reason they call it an ambulance is because everybody gets out of the way when they come through the community. And then even if the waste is being removed from the community, it needs to be treated. And in the absence of significant processing plants, the majority of what happens is that waste just gets tipped. And this here is just a little bit outside of the slums where we work. Typically, I've seen people who will just dump it in a schoolyard when the school's not in session. These risks are profound. And in Nairobi, what that leads to right now is that 2 million tons of waste every year are being developed by the residents of the city, and 90% of that waste ends up not being untreated. So what's the answer? Well, sewers, as Damon just talked about, is one of the solutions, right? But in order to build sewers in informal settlements, it would cost $55.77 per person per year. And this is a very conservative estimate. In the US here, we spend more than $150 per person per year. Nairobi's budget right now, $3 per person per year. And last year, they passed one of the most progressive sanitation policies that in Africa, or really throughout the developing world. And over the next 13 years, they want to get to $12 per person per year. which is great. It's 4 times more than what we're at now, but it's no way going to cover the cost to put in sewers. So this is where Sanergy comes in. And what we do is we take a full value chain approach to solving the sanitation crisis. We do this in 5 steps. First, we build a dense network of low-cost toilets. Second, we franchise them to people within the community who operate them to keep them clean, safe, and open. Third, we provide the right support services so that they're able to thrive. Fourth, we provide a quality collection service. And then finally, we aggregate this waste at a centralized facility where we're processing it into valuable end products, namely organic fertilizer and animal feed. So this is what it looks like. This here is the Fresh Life toilet. It is a bright blue, eye-catching facility that has a lovely translucent roof, and underneath it, what is called a urine-diverting dry squat plate that separates the liquid and the solid waste into a cartridge system. We distribute these toilets through 3 simple models. First, a commercial model. So entrepreneurs invest in this so that they're able to run them as small businesses, charging their neighbors and the community user fees in order to gain access. This here is Agnes. She's one of our entrepreneurs from the very beginning, from 5 years ago, and she's still with us. When she started, she was previously running a business called Changa, which is basically moonshine. And instead, she decided, and as she ran that, she had to pay the cops off to run her business. People would make sort of inappropriate comments to her, sort of associating with sort of illicit activities. And instead, what she did was she decided to run our toilets as a business. Now she's running 3 of these successfully, and she's taking the profits that she's making into this actually to invest in literacy for herself, to be able to take on other income-earning opportunities too. Second, we have a residential model. So we work with landlords within the informal settlements who are able to provide these as value-add service to tenants. Families love this because now they have 24/7 access to toilets close to where they are living. They don't have to walk to other facilities at night. They don't have to worry about where their kids are. It works really well for everybody. And then finally, we work in schools and community institutions. We're in about 100 schools right now, providing sanitation to about 5,000 or 6,000 students. We're able to partner with the government on this so that we're actually providing it at 1/5 of the cost on what they used to be providing before. We provide hygiene promotion training and things like that because this sanitation challenge, very seriously, is a 30-year challenge. We need to be working with kids to make sure that they're adopting the right behaviors around sanitation. Regardless of the distribution model, we provide important support services. This here is our business in a box that every operator gets on day 1. It ranges from things like marketing and marketing kits and uniforms and gumboots, which people really love, to really the basics of like hand washing stations and soap. We want to make sure that these operators can succeed from the very beginning. And then we provide a safe and professional waste removal system. This here is Joseph. He's one of our waste collectors. He's been with us for a long time. All of our waste collectors come from the community, and they're full-time employees. As you can see, he has a uniform, he has gloves, he has masks, he has all the appropriate PPE you need. What you don't see is that he has health insurance and inoculations too, to turn something that was very informal and highly risky into a dignified formal profession. He does a daily collection to our toilets, and he's using hand carts to take it from the center of the slums where there aren't paved roads to the perimeter where we have trucks that enable us that we take the waste out to a much larger processing plant. And this is where some of the magic happens. So this here is where we're converting the waste into nutrient-rich, safe organic fertilizer. We are able to produce this in about 6 days through a composting, 6 months, through a composting process that is both safe and starts to create a product that people actually need, organic fertilizer, to address a lot of the sustainable agricultural challenges that we currently face in Kenya. The Kenyan government recommends 10 tons per hectare of organic fertilizer is what's needed. And there's 27 million hectares of arable land in Kenya. There is a huge opportunity. We have become, in a very short time, the biggest producer of organic fertilizer, and we're only producing at about 500 tons a year. You can see there's a huge challenge. So where are we? Well, right now, we opened our first toilets on November 19th, World Toilet Day for all of you out there, 2011. And we're currently in one slum called Makuru. There are about 500,000 people there. And we serve about 10% of the population with hygienic sanitation for the very first time. What that means is that and this is through a network of about 1,000 toilets run by 500 operators. What that means is that we're also collecting about 4,000 tons of waste every year. And this is growing very quickly. At the same time, we are guaranteeing all of the waste that we collect is being safely treated and safely removed from the community. We're currently removing about 15 tons of this per day. And the farmers are loving it. We work with over 500 farmers, and they're seeing increasing crop yields of over 30%, which is, of course, great for the farmer who's making more money and great for the Kenyan citizens who are gaining much more access to food. But the really, really important thing about what we're doing is this one. And I know this is a storytelling conference, but this graph tells you a lot. So the $55.77 at the beginning that I was telling you about is the cost for sewers to provide sewers. If the government's going to invest in that, it's going to be $54 of that. That's how much. But what we're able to do already is provide this at $22.55 per year. And because of the market forces that come into play, because communities are investing, or individuals are investing in sanitation for themselves, and because there's such a great end market for the agricultural products, the government only needs to invest $11. And this is really just the beginning for us. But we've made it such that it already costs just 1/5 of what it costs, what the most common alternative would be otherwise. So now, there's 1,000 cities that are exactly like Nairobi. And we feel that we're just at the very beginning of something that's going to change the world in terms of being able to provide dignified sanitation for everyone forever. Thank you.
I'm pleased to present our next speaker, who's Murray Fischer. He's the founder and executive director of the New York Harbor Foundation and the New York Harbor School, which is a public school in New York City located on Governor's Island that aims to instill environmental stewardship in its students as well as prepare them for college. So, Murray.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeanne, and what an honor to be here. And I definitely am an Earth optimist, and so I love this summit. Thank you to the Smithsonian. And how's everybody feeling today? Good? Optimistic? Good. All right, great. Well, I've got a little story for you, and I'm going to advance this first slide here. I'm going to talk about starting a school in New York City, and how we started the school, and we thought that we'd finished our story. That was a big thing to have done. But then we realized that we were just beginning. And so we ended up starting a project called the Billion Oyster Project. This is where we do our work in New York City. I run the New York Harbor Foundation. I'm the executive director of the New York Harbor Foundation. Our mission is to improve the condition of, the access to, and awareness about New York Harbor. A lot of people know about the Hudson River. Here's the lower Hudson River right here. A lot of people know about Long Island Sound. A lot of people know about the Atlantic Ocean, maybe Jamaica Bay, Raritan Bay, Newark, as we just heard about, Newark Bay. But the place where all this comes together is called New York Harbor. It's one of the most densely populated places in the world, and one of the most degraded, ultra-urban ecosystems on the planet. And so we thought it was a really fascinating place to try and work on how do we connect young people to the water? How do we connect young people to nature? How do we train young people who care about these things? And I wanted to just write down here, read for you all
is that in an increasingly urbanized world, the majority of young people are growing up apart from nature. We know that's true. And the natural worlds that they do happen to encounter are nowhere near as accessible or bountiful or beautiful and biodiverse as they were historically. The work to protect, preserve, and restore these ecosystems is broadly characterized as the environment. Simultaneously, there are massive, well-resourced efforts aimed at increasing student engagement in schools, particularly in inner cities, with a specific goal of improving outcomes for millions of young people. This effort is education. Too often, though, these issues, environment and education, are approached as distinct and unrelated. So this is the story of our attempt to insert the local ecosystem back into our education system and to insert kids back into the ecosystem, with the belief that if we are going to continue living, working, teaching, and learning on this planet, we must fundamentally change how humans learn about and interact with nature. So I'm going to back it up a little bit and tell you briefly about my own story. I grew up on a farm in Virginia where it's really easy to interact with nature. And I fell in love with the natural world. Those are my earliest memories. And I realized going through all of school and college that I had developed a disproportionate affection for the natural world that I didn't see in a lot of my peers. And so that's something I wanted to nurture, and I was a biology major in college. And I realized from an early age that I wanted to stop the destruction of the natural world that I was witnessing. I had no idea how I would do it. I thought I'd do it as a biologist, so I was a biology major. But I spent one year working for the Wildlife Conservation Society down in the jungles, monitoring macaws. And after about a month of it, I got really bored and realized I'm not going to be a very good biologist. So I have to figure out a way to get back to more people. And I ended up out of college working for the group Riverkeeper up in New York City. I'd never been to New York City, but I worked for Riverkeeper helping document pollution on the Hudson River and helping teach people about the Hudson River. And I fell, honestly, very deeply in love with the Hudson River in a way that I didn't anticipate doing at all. And I learned more than I felt like I learned during my high school or my college experiences when I was working on and about protecting and restoring the Hudson River. And I realized at that moment, I was 23, but I realized at that moment that the work that I wanted to do, I had wanted to do since I was really young, and I wasn't able to do it until I got to this place where I was working when I was 24. I wanted to be working to protect, restore fisheries when I was a kid. I wanted to protect and restore marshland when I was a kid. I grew up duck hunting and fishing, and I always wanted to work to protect more of these species and create more abundance. But it was really hard to do it. So I worked for Riverkeeper, and I loved it, and I remember thinking, this should be school. This is what school should look like. I was out catching fish in a big net with DEC scientists 100 miles up the Hudson River. I remember thinking, this is what school should be. But I didn't realize at the time that that was really what I wanted to work on, and I went to work for Waterkeeper Alliance for 3 more years, helping start new waterkeeper programs around the world. And I had kind of a dream job because I was traveling all over the world, vetting new potential waterkeepers and helping them become waterkeepers by incorporating or getting trained. And over the course of 3 years, helped 60 new programs start, and I loved it. But I was still living in New York City, and I was frustrated about a couple things. First of all, I didn't have a lot of access to the natural world, and I was missing that. Second of all, I wanted there to be a place where we could actually train these people, these new potential waterkeepers. There wasn't a physical training facility. But the third and most important one is that I was part of a massive, progressive environmental movement, and it was almost entirely older white men. And I thought, this isn't going to work. First of all, it's not fair. It's not fair that these opportunities aren't for more people of color, aren't for more younger people, aren't for more women. But second of all, it's not going to work. If our goal, if what we're trying to do is protect the environment, we're going to lose if we aren't representing a much broader demographic. And here I was in New York City, where in the public schools, 8 out of every 10 kids are students of color. And so I thought, well, how are we training young people in our cities to protect the planet? And realizing there's a school in New York City about everything, but there wasn't a school about that local place in New York Harbor. And so it was an interesting case of me just saying, why don't we start a New York Harbor school? And everyone I talked to about it saying, how can I help? So I was 27 years old, and I proposed the New York Harbor School. And we actually, when we first started, I'm not clicking this very well. When we first started, we actually started right here in Bushwick, Brooklyn, which happens to be the very furthest place from the water in the entire city. And a really unlikely and tough place to start a school. We're on the 4th floor of an old, phased-out Bushwick High School, 125 students, public high school, not even a charter school. And we had to travel an hour and a half to get our kids to the water to try and get them to fall in love with the marine environment. It was a really tough thing to do. It was awesome to be in that community because it was definitely addressing those kids and that pipeline issue that I wanted to work on. But it was tough because we had lack of access. And so I worked for 6 years to try and identify a place on the water to do this. And as you can see, there's 600 miles of waterfront in New York City. Lots of opportunities. I'm now realizing I'm going to have to go a lot faster. So after 6 years, we moved the school to this beautiful island. And the pointer right here in the middle of New York Harbor called Governor's Island. And Governor's Island is a 172-acre former military base. It's been empty since 1995, and the Harbor School became the first tenant on Governor's Island. We moved into a beautiful $35 million new facility. Students were now commuting mostly from Bushwick, but from all 5 boroughs all over the city. So we now had 475 students. This is 2010, 9 through 12. And we had the average commute for a student was an hour. And yet they came to school, and we were creating a bunch of programs, 6 of which are called these career and technical education programs. We created 6 career and technical education programs in marine fields: aquaculture, marine biology, marine systems technology, ocean engineering, professional diving, and vessel operations. All of those fields mean that a Harbor School student takes 3 years of sequential courses that terminate with a technical credential in one of those fields. And so it felt a little bit, and here's just sort of a nice picture of all the great stuff that was happening at Harbor School. It felt a little bit like we'd slayed a dragon. We'd built the school. We'd created these 6 career and technical education programs. We were on Governor's Island. We built a second marine science and technology center. But we were missing something, which was, first of all, it was really hard to engage kids in the actual work of the marine environment. We could take them rowing, or we could sail, or we could drive boats, or we could build boats, or we could do water quality monitoring, we could do aquaculture. We could do a lot of that stuff, but what was bringing it all together? What was the work? What was the real work of Harbor School about? The second thing is we wanted to export the work that we were doing to more kids, to more places, but we couldn't go start more schools. It was really hard to do that. And so we thought, what's our curriculum that we can spread throughout the city? And the third thing is that the harbor that we'd built our entire school around and about was still a massively degraded resource, still a really largely inaccessible resource, still really polluted. And so what responsibility did we have to try and do something about that? So we decided that we wanted to restore New York Harbor. We wanted to export this curriculum. We wanted to engage all of our kids in one project. And we called that project the Billion Oyster Project. We called it the Billion Oyster Project because looking back historically, we realized that New York Harbor had 220,000 acres of oyster reef, trillions of oysters. Every drop of water would have passed through an oyster in New York Harbor faster than it would have done that in the Chesapeake or other places that are so well known for their oysters, because New Yorkers ate them all so long ago that there have been none for about 100 years, functionally extinct in New York Harbor. Rather than 220,000 acres of reef, the bottom of the harbor is just flat mud everywhere. And so we wanted to bring back oysters, and we wanted to bring back 1 billion oysters, and we wanted to engage the entire city in doing it. And that's essentially what the Billion Oyster Project is about. How do you engage an entire city in restoring its local marine ecosystem? And we didn't have the answers, which actually is really cool, because if you don't have the answers, everyone gets more engaged. Kids are much more likely to learn well if the adults don't have the answers. Other partners are much likely to engage if you're not telling them exactly what to do, but rather, can you help us do this thing that we don't know exactly how to do? And so, using a lot of other schools as partners, we have, I'm going to have to rush through. We have 100 school partners now through a National Science Foundation grant where we're building curriculum for middle schools. We are collecting oyster shells to use as the building blocks for growing new oysters from 60 restaurants around New York City. That's only 10%, so we have a long way to go. We're obviously getting a lot of community volunteers involved to help come out and do the work, which is really thrilling. And those 6 career and technical education programs are actually living out their work by doing the Billion Oyster Project at Harbor School. So these are aquaculture students measuring oysters on an oyster reef under the Williamsburg Bridge. These are marine biology students measuring the water quality at that same reef to see whether or not those oysters had a positive impact. These are actually students who are welding, who are building the reef infrastructure and getting their welding certification. These are students doing their ocean engineering. We use the ROVs that they build to go down and monitor the reefs when scuba divers can't get down there. These are scuba divers monitoring one of the experimental reefs right off the coast of Brooklyn. And these are students in our vessel operations program operating our 6 boats that we're using to help go out to reefs, build reefs, essentially run a gigantic commercial operation. And so I only have 30 seconds left, but I'm going to take just a little bit of that time to run a video that shows how all these great pictures came together and showcasing the work of the Harbor School students in the Billion Oyster Project.
Hey guys, this is Benjamin Von Wong, and we're here today on Governor's Island shooting for the Billion Oyster Project. Our goal to highlight the kids, the heroes of the project that are actually bringing this to life.
Back when the settlers were coming in, there were oyster reefs and like mountains of them, tons of them, but we ate those away. Oysters are keystone species, and what they do is they filter the water, and any like sustenance that's in the water, they'll process that and they'll eat it. That's their food. Like one fully grown adult oyster can filter 50 gallons a day.
I'm making a tangible difference in my environment because we live in an island city, so it's really great to know that when I come out here to help, it's definitely making a difference. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna write this paper to the governor and like maybe something will happen. It's like, oh yeah, I went out sampling on Saturday. What did you do?
Okay, so thank you to Ben Von Wong. That video is going to be released tomorrow for Earth Day, and so check it out, the whole video. I just wanted to give a quick snapshot. Huge honor to be here. I've gone beyond my time, but I really do want people to think about why we can't put young people to work restoring ecosystems in school. There are degraded ecosystems everywhere there are students, and so often we put so much time, energy, and money into their education, and we neglect the local ecosystem right where they are. And so I just think it's an exciting model because at the same time, not only are we preparing them for college, but we're preparing them for real careers through career and technical education. And I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Murray got a great shout out at this morning's plenary session, and now I see why. That's awesome. Our final speaker is Tim Beatley, who's the Teresa Hines Professor of Sustainable Development in the Department of Urban and Environmental Planning at the University of Virginia. He's the author of numerous books on blue urbanism and biophilic cities, which we've invited him here to explain to you. Please welcome Tim.
Thanks. Well, good afternoon. I'm going to get my slides up. So I'm going to sort of back up a little bit, give you a little bit of a higher altitude view of what's going on in cities, and introduce you to this idea of biophilic cities. So one assignment for you today is to take that word biophilic. You have to use it in a conversation at some point. Maybe a couple of times today would be a good thing to do. So I'm a city planner, and these are both daunting and exciting times when we think about the challenges that cities are facing. How are cities going to adapt to climate change? How are we going to quickly transition to renewable energy? How are we going to take care of housing and sanitation and all the problems faced by cities? We think that we're going to have to imagine more sustainable places, and those places will have to be more compact and they'll have to be denser. But increasingly, we recognize that we've also got to provide opportunities for nature, for experiencing nature in cities. So with this in mind, we started something called the Biophilic Cities Project around this idea of biophilia. I have to give a lot of credit. There's a quote from Ed Wilson, E.O. Wilson at Harvard. He wasn't the first person to use the term biophilia, but he's really coined it in the way that we think of it now, which is this idea that we've co-evolved with nature, with the natural world. So not surprising that we are happier, healthier, able to lead more meaningful lives when we have nature around us. And it can't just be nature that we get on a holiday, on a summer vacation. It has to be all around us. It has to be daily nature or hourly nature, and it has to be integrated and designed into the neighborhoods and work spaces where we spend most of our time. So biophilia, this innate connection, this innate affiliation that we have for the natural world. Here's my second Wilson slide. The human species has grown up in nature. We're carrying with us our ancient brains, if you will. It's also an innate connection that needs to be fostered, though. This is an image actually from a film that we're making about cities and ocean. It's this idea of blue urbanism. We're the blue planet, and we're the urban planet, but we don't often connect the two realms. And we filmed in Miami at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Biscayne Nature Center, and we actually followed out into the ocean of a whole group of fifth graders, and we followed them. We had cameras, and the water was sort of up to their knees, and most of these kids had never been in the water before and had little exposure to that marine world, even though they didn't live that far away. And it was really amazing to see their reactions. So each pair of students got a net, and they were asked to sort of scoop the bottom of the area where we were walking in the water, and they were pulling up just remarkable things. And this image doesn't show it very well, but one student found what to me looked like an orange tennis ball, and it turned out to be a puffer fish. And when they put it in the water, we had these little floating buckets, and it deflated and became a fish again. And just the awe that the students reacted to, just the kind of amazement that I saw in their faces. So biophilia is innate, but it's like a muscle. We have to exercise it. We have to foster those connections. And that's a lot of what a biophilic city is, I believe. So in 2013, we actually launched this thing called the Biophilic Cities Network. The second task for you is to take a look at our webpage, biophilic.cities.org. We have a new logo. We have a lot of material online. We've been trying to tell the stories of various cities around the US and around the world. And we've been telling them in various ways, often through films and filmmaking, which is very effective. There is an online pledge, so you can actually join the Biophilic Cities Network either as an individual or a group just by signing a pledge. To be an official partner city requires a little bit more, and it requires, among other things, the identifying of a certain number of metrics that will track progress over time, and there has to be an official city council adopted resolution or proclamation stating the intention to become a biophilic city and to join the network. So we are gaining great traction, we think, right now. We have about 15 cities that have joined the network, and it's growing in number and in impact. Last summer, we had a couple of very high-profile cities. Washington, D.C. has now joined the network. These are images from Washington, and actually the image of Dean Sabine O'Hara, the dean of the College of Agriculture at UDC, not far from here. Every city in the network is doing interesting work and interesting projects, a little bit different conceptions of nature. These are images from their urban agriculture initiative, and actually Dean O'Hara has been helping to establish a series of urban food hubs in neighborhoods around Washington. And actually on the roof of her building, 18-inch growing spaces that produce a lot of food, so much food, in fact, that there's a CSA, community-supported agriculture, that operates out of the ground floor. So people are picking up weekly shares of food grown on the roof. So that's kind of one thing that Washington is doing. Edmonton, Canada, another high-profile city that joined last summer. A remarkable story of how this city is growing in ways that encourage ecological connectivity everything that happens, every road, every project that's built in the city has to ensure this ecological connection. And they've just finished building their 27th wildlife passage. So whenever they build anything, it's judged by the success of the movement of animals through the city. So a really remarkable story in that way. This is an image from a celebratory event in the Edmonton Public Library over the summer. We had 250 people talking about how this city was going to aspire to even greater biophilic aspirations or accomplishments. One of the interesting things about Edmonton, we commissioned a 5-minute film to tell the story of Edmonton, and we saw kind of early versions of this film, and our Edmonton partners were saying, well, all of the images in this film are sort of from summer, but yet Edmonton, half the year, is very snowy and cold. So the nature's a little bit different in those times of the year. And so the movie got revised, and you can find the movie. It's on our YouTube channel. It's a beautiful film, and it tells a little bit more the story of the winter city. So a biophilic city is a city that encourages its citizens to get outside and spend more time outside. So to that end, Edmonton actually has developed a winter strategy, and you're seeing some of the images here, including a set of winter design guidelines. How do we design the physical spaces of a city to shield from winter winds, to provide warming stations, to provide, in the case of the image on the lower right, this really interesting idea of a freezeway or an ice ribbon, so that maybe you could actually commute to work on ice skates in the winter, outside, connected to nature. So really remarkable things happening in that city. Pittsburgh has just joined our network this fall. Here are some ways that Pittsburgh already imagines itself to be a biophilic city. The rivers, the 3 rivers, very important forms of nature there. Their strategy in Pittsburgh is get as many people outside, putting in new trails and bike paths to get folks close to the river. There's even a water trail for kayaks and canoes. Forest canopy coverage, when you look down at the city, what percentage of that area is covered by forest, by trees? It's pretty high, 42%. And parks like the South Shore Waterfront Park that actually are designed to flood, so gets residents down close to the water, but also resilient in the face of things like flood events. So we've gotten a lot of support actually from Mayor Peduto, the mayor of Pittsburgh. Here he is receiving a Biophilic Cities certificate. They indicating they're officially joining the network, and we did this at the Phipps Conservatory in Pittsburgh. This is very much a global movement, so we're seeing cities interested around the world. These are images from Chengdu, China. We've gone there and had discussions, and hopefully they'll be joining our network. Already a pretty amazing story. What you see on the left is an ecological ring, a network of wetlands and green spaces connected and encircling the center of that town, providing remarkable nature and remarkable recreation opportunities in that city of about 10 million. So the Biophilic Cities Project and the Biophilic Cities Network is doing many things to collect and tell the stories of what cities are doing. We've just issued an inaugural Biophilic Cities, inaugural issue of our Biophilic Cities Journal. That's online. Would encourage everybody to look for that. I mentioned the films, and we've been making films about almost every city. One of them I'd recommend is our film about Singapore. It's a 45-minute film. You can find it entirely on YouTube. Just Google Singapore, a biophilic city. Our emphasis is really low-budget films. We put cameras in front of folks, and we ask them to tell the story of their project or their neighborhood or their initiative. And this particular film, the Singapore film, has had 60,000 views. So it's not Taylor Swift, I know, it's not Beyonce, but it's pretty good for a low-budget film. And other cities are learning from what Singapore is doing. So what is a biophilic city? I think you can already tell some of the key dimensions. It's a natureful city. It is a city of abundant nature, biodiversity, of natural wildness. But increasingly, our cities are pushing the envelope. They're reimagining the very nature of a city. So I think we've gotten over this bifurcation that, in fact, a city, that nature and city are polar opposites. But I think we still have this notion that to visit nature in the city, to find nature in the city, you have to travel somewhere. You have to go down the street to the park or visit a forest. And so increasingly, our cities are reimagining themselves as parks or as gardens. So this is an image actually from Singapore, one of our partner cities. They have officially changed their motto from Singapore, a garden city, to Singapore, a city and a garden. And that sounds like a small change, but it's really quite a remarkable difference. So let's imagine cities as parks. Let's imagine cities as gardens and as forests. Other cities are doing it as well. Singapore is implementing this idea in lots of ways. They have a landscape replacement policy, so whenever they build anything in the city, they have to replace the nature taken at ground level with nature in the vertical realm. And buildings, remarkable buildings like this Park Royal Hotel, a new hotel, you can see how biophilic it is, adding to this sort of immersed in nature setting. So you have tree lines that are connecting with green rooftops, that are connecting with ground level gardens. About out of time, but I'm going to give you one or two more examples, and then I'm going to quickly go through some of the remaining slides just to give you a visual impression of what other cities are doing. Melbourne, Australia is also imagining this more immersive idea of nature. And so they've just completed actually a new forest plan that aspires to doubling their tree canopy coverage by 2040. Most importantly, though, their vision is not just planting more trees in the city. Their vision actually is of a city in a forest. Really quite important. You may have heard about some of their really creative community engagement techniques, and they have actually identified, they've labeled, they've given every tree in their city a unique number, and every tree its own unique email address. So that's pretty interesting. You can send a loving email to your favorite tree. Here's Biophilia. And in fact, the tree will return your email. It'll send you something back. Okay, so the idea of having nature around you and being able to move to progressively larger amounts of nature, rooftop or room to region or bioregion, and all the scales in between. We talk about a whole of city approach. We talk about this idea of a nature pyramid, like the food pyramid. What do we need for a healthy nature diet? And what constitutes the servings, the urban serving of nature that we need? And so this pyramid, like the food pyramid, suggests that we've got to think about the things at the base of that pyramid, the things around which will construct the bulk of our nature diet. So we can't build that diet by going off to visit that faraway place. The carbon footprint associated with that is going to be too great. So we've got to think about what is all that nature nearby, the local nature. Okay. Biophilic cities also shared habitat. This is the story of the Mexican free-tailed bats, 1.5 million bats in Austin, Texas. Austin has just joined our network, a remarkable story of a city that's gone from biophobia about bats to celebrating the bats. There are even 2 or 3 bat-watching dinner cruises that go up and down the lower Colorado River, and during the summer when the bats emerge at night from the bridge. Wildness is important. This is Richmond, Virginia, remarkable story of how the James River Class 4 rapids is the central park, really, for this city. And they're doing all kinds of impressive things to connect folks to that watery environment. This is Gig Harbor, Washington, where they send volunteer divers underwater to send images to a pier, to screen on a pier. And they have this event called Pier Into the Night, making the invisible nature of cities more visible and more tangible. Remarkable stories and remarkably creative ideas. A program on the left in St. Louis, City of St. Louis has just joined our network, and that's the outgoing mayor, Francis Slay, who declared the goal of the city planting 250 butterfly gardens by a certain date. They've exceeded that goal. They've now reached 370, and it's an interesting metric for success of a city. number of butterfly gardens, the possibility that you live in a neighborhood where you're going to see butterflies. On the right, a marvelous story from Wellington, New Zealand, where they have protected a wild area in the middle of that city with a predator-proof fence and allowing the native species of birds to repropagate. And their tagline is bringing birdsong back to Wellington. Birdsong. Everybody living in a city should be entitled to hear birdsong. What an interesting metric, an interesting way of judging the success of a city. That's a biophilic city, I would argue. Nature is in lots of forms and lots of ways. It's just an important point to say. It's shapes and forms and images of nature, and it's human design nature as well. We've gotten to know a Spanish designer who has designed this system for installing green roofs on the tops of buses. And a fellow named Mark Ranyan. And there are several cities in Spain where these buses are driving around. Vitoria-Gasteiz and the Basque Country, a green ring, Oslo forested areas, and urban stream restoration work in that city. I'm almost done. And Milwaukee, marvelous reuse of spaces, vacant lots. Singapore, again, a marvelous set of park connectors in that city. I really do need to stop. I promise I have 2 more slides. San Francisco, converting sidewalks to gardens and a new sidewalk landscaping permit. And I think this is, in fact, my last slide. My last point, and I think it builds on what Murray is saying, that we've got to begin to think about cities and the marine and aquatic environments around them. And so we're really seeing cities like Wellington begin to understand their nature as integrated land-sea. So Wellington is imagining blue belts to complement its network of green belts. So that's it. Thanks so much, and sorry to go a little long.
Great, you can just stay out here.
I can stay here. Okay.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much for providing that context for our case studies from Newark and New York and Nairobi. We're going to bring all the rest of our speakers out, thank everybody, and I think we have about 10 minutes for questions, which is amazing. We're on schedule. So welcome back to Damon and David and Murray. And we could talk amongst ourselves, but I think it would be more fun to get questions from you. There are microphones on each side, so if you have a question, jump up and grab a microphone. And while you do that, while you get yourself organized, we'll start. So, okay, great, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Eleanor Lacane from the Breakthrough Way, and I love what you're doing. I'm wondering, how do you communicate your successful case studies and successful models so more people can learn about them?
Anybody start?
Well,
Murray?
Here's what I'll say. That's an interesting question. This is a massive struggle for us right now, and I would love, I'm not answering the question, but I'm very interested to know also I just want to say that we spend a lot of our time talking on the phone and visiting and trying to help people do this kind of work in other places around the world, but we're having trouble figuring out how to scale up to the next level, and so it's a really relevant question for me on the panel as well.
Well, and I return to the point you made that you don't have all the answers and that engages people. So maybe not having answers is good because you can bring people in who might have the answers.
Yeah. One thing that's definitely not the only answer is the internet. The internet is certainly not enough. From my experience, I've worked with a lot of people that are like, we keep on putting stuff out and it's not really reaching the point of saturation. And I remember one big breakthrough was figuring out that in the Jamaican spot where you get delicious patties, they had a whole shelf dedicated to people's palm cards, spreading the word about either a religious revival or a club night. And that was where we had to be, in addition to the internet, if we wanted to reach a full spectrum of folks.
One of the things that really struck me about your story was the different ways you did engage people with music, with storytelling, with, what did you call them, walk shops, where you're actually walking with people through the city and engaging them in efforts to improve it. So I think you've got some good models there.
We run a fellowship program, and so we take students and come work with us in Nairobi for 3 months, and then we fully expect them to share the story on their campuses too, as a way to really trigger different people's thinking, and it works pretty well. We get good talent.
We've got another questioner waiting patiently over here on the left.
I'm Jerry Unger. I'm with Hawk Mountain Sanctuary Association. But my question is, and I understand the direct connections between human health and the cities and biophilic cities, but how you're measuring that. I mean, I think that you can really measure it with the sanitation and with people engaging and walking and that sort of thing. But insofar as the biophilic cities, how can you engage more directly with the public health community to bring them along with healthy foods and distribution of foods and food sources?
Yeah. Well, they're very much there, and if you could have believed I had a longer version of this, there would have been slides about public health. We know that nature has this amazing ability to propel us outside. We know that in greener neighborhoods we're more healthy, we're exercising, we're walking. So there's a natural synergy, and they, a very united front there that we should be working on. I think it's seeking out public health folks in communities, building alliances, but that's a key part of the rationale, I think, for a biophilic city, definitely.
To follow up on that, I wanted to ask David about the sort of public health implications of using what used to be called night soil for fertilizer. Is it entirely safe? Is there any cultural sort of hesitation about that? I mean, how do you handle that?
Sure. And not to be too technical, but night soil is never treated.
Yeah.
It goes straight from the toilet onto the soil.
Right.
And we work to ensure that we put it through a very safe treatment process. It's interesting because actually, I mean, it is really about a safety issue. And in fact, in the UK, for example, 80% of all treated sewage ends up back on fields. And it's just something that people don't talk about because, and I understand there's sort of social taboos around it and you don't want to think about that kind of stuff too much, but it really is about the safety of the product. And the one thing I like to liken it to is actually sausages, the food, because when you think about what goes into sausage, you don't really want to think about it. And, but you wake up in the morning dreaming of eating sausage. And this is how I think about organic fertilizer, because all that really matters is that you believe the safety of the production. And from that, you will end up with very healthy, happy customers.
Right. Question on the right, or my right.
So kind of building off of the not really wanting to know what's inside of the sausage, but eating it anyways and enjoying it. This is for the Billion Oyster Project. So what are your long-term goals in regards to these oysters, and I guess how much are they actually cleaning the water, and then one day do you want to eat the oysters?
Yeah, thank you. That's like the question that comes up every time I talk, and I should just, it's a very good question. And obviously one thing that's been really great about using oysters as a restoration, as an animal to restore, is that people are also so excited about eating oysters. So we have this whole world of food and foodies who are now excited about the natural world and restoration. But so what we say is that our oysters, first of all, New York Harbor is still way too polluted to be able to eat our oysters, and will be for definitely my lifetime. What we say is we want to plant 1 billion live oysters in New York Harbor by 2035. And we think that that's the level of human intervention necessary to jumpstart the ecosystem again and start giving oysters a chance to start naturally reproducing. But we tell people that we don't eat these oysters not only because they're polluted and full of toxins and heavy metals and bacteria, but also because they have much more important work to do down in the harbor, and those are ecosystem services. And the three main ecosystem services are that they historically protected the city from storms, oyster reefs, which is hugely important if you think about that, and so they have a role to play in wave attenuation. And so the second one is the habitat for all of the other fish and animals that live in and around oyster reefs. And the third is the water filtration. We try and stay away from saying that they clean the water, because that's not technically accurate, but they do make the water clearer, and they do filter out the suspended sediments in the water and all the suspended solids in the water. So those three ecosystem services we think are so important to the city that we want to leave the oysters down there and eat farmed oysters from clean water.
Next on this side.
This question was originally for the gentleman, was the idea about the toilets, but this expanded to all of you. Moving forward into the future, what is the biggest challenge that each one of you see for your individual projects?
Sure, thanks. So our big next challenge is how you persuade municipalities that sewers are not the sole solution that you need, and that you actually need a variety of solutions that don't involve sewers too, but that you can then safely manage and treat waste and get it out of the communities and ensure that it's safely treated too. And that's our next big step in thinking. And we're making really good progress with Nairobi County. And we think we get that right, we're able to take that lots of other places too.
Murray, do you?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, our biggest challenge, obviously funding, we feel like we can do a lot more work with more money. But the biggest challenge for us is also regulatory. I mean, surprisingly, in New York State, there's no policy objective to restore oysters in closed waters that are classified as too polluted to use for shellfish growing. And so as a result of that, our oyster restoration projects, to permit something the size of these couches here, has to go through 2 years of permitting process because it's working in a regulatory framework that was designed to keep developers from filling in wetlands and bottomlands under the harbor. There's no regulatory framework to support restoring oysters, even though everyone says they like it and it sounds good. So we have to work our way through that, which takes up so much time, energy, and money, and really turns what should be a several acre reef into a several hundred square meter reef. And with those, it's much harder to have real, lasting, and measurable impact at that small scale.
Tim, a challenge for Biophilic?
Yeah, well, just I would probably answer it thinking about networks, and there are lots of challenges in how we get cities to share stories, and their challenges from their technology challenges, their time zone challenges, their sort of cultural issues, and how you kind of discuss stories. So we have tremendous, I think, belief in the power of sharing and the power of helping. And one of the things that we discovered is that there is a great need in each city. We knew this would be important as an intercity network, but what we're also finding is this need to pull people together and organizations together under a biophilic umbrella within individual cities. So we've been helping to form, there's a group here in Washington called Biophilic DC. There's a group in Philadelphia called Biophily, which is the coolest possible name, I think, of any organization.
We're about out of time, but we should give Damon the last word. Since you had the first word, you get the last word too.
All right. Well, I mean, I'll leave with I guess one of my personal and organizational challenges, which is that in terms of the people I feel like that pulled my jacket and told me which way was up, that allowed me to make any kind of contribution to the kinds of efforts that we're talking about today. For 40 years, the struggle really was an environmentally just and healthy place to live, right? And that's what people were putting all their energy and struggle into. And now I think the thing that is really front and center is that all of that work may in fact not benefit the people that did it, but the people who are now moving into the city with the tremendous reorientation of capital investment that we've seen over the last 20 years. So people talk about a phrase, green gentrification, right? Which is that you work for all these decades to improve the place just to lose out on the opportunity to take advantage of it. And so that certainly is a really foreboding challenge, I think, that we all have right now.
All right, so many challenges, so little time. But thank you to all of you for sharing your incredible stories of success in the city. And thank you to all of you for coming.
Thank you.